2018. Why don't we start with Kristen Rush? Would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Williams. Mayor Pro Tem Moreno.
Here.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Here.
Councilmember Ford.
Here.
Councilmember Jones.
Here.
Councilmember McGough.
Here.
Councilmember Miller.
Here.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to call on Councilmember Bob Pfeiffer.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to excuse Mayor Mark Williams from this evening's workshop.
Okay, so the motion is to excuse the mayor from this workshop. All members have voted. There are 6 yeses and 0 noes, with Mayor Williams absent, so he is excused. Okay, first up, we have the Arts and Culture Master Plan. Mr. Devon?
Yes, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council, we're going to have, who is it again? Janess from the Art and Culture Commission make this presentation.
Good evening. How are you?
Good evening. Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. My name is Janess Brewer. I'm with the 23.4 Degrees team. Myself and Mike Hughes are here tonight to present to you the draft Arts and Culture Plan that you should have received a copy of. So I'm not with the commission. We're the consulting company that's helping to develop the plan, though there are several members of the commission here tonight. If you all want to give a wave, I'm sure you know them all.
Thank you. Welcome, and thank you for coming tonight.
Indeed. So, let's see. I know I'm going to ask that question that you said is asked every week. How do I get the slides to pop up? Perfect. All right. She said every week everyone tries to figure out how to work this, but I was determined not to do that. Can you go, let's go ahead and scroll back then. All right. Okay. So this is us. This is Mike and myself. We're a small woman-owned company. We specialize in art and culture planning, stakeholder engagement, environmental and health, public policy issues. The most fun we have, though, and the most enjoyment we have is working with communities on planning art and culture and what the future looks like for their different communities. So we've done recent work here in the Front Range, also in the mountains, and work on a number of other areas in terms of art and culture. So we didn't do this plan alone. This was definitely not Mike and I sitting in an office room and determining, what would be really fantastic for Arvada. So it started first with the commission members that I just pointed out. That started with the central group, and then from there, they and we really invited the larger community in. So we had a number of different leaders who were a part of the steering committee. Charlie McKay is here tonight. Councilmember Nancy Ford was a part of that as well, and a number of different leaders from economic development to Parks and Rec, artists in the community. So you can see the diversity of different people who were quite involved. So these people met at least 4 times over the last 6 months, and we made them roll up their sleeves and work pretty hard on the plan that you see tonight. Additionally, we went to the community, so it wasn't enough to go to people who think about arts and culture somewhat regularly and are really invested in that way, but we also showed up at a chocolate affair, as well as St. Patrick's Day. We engaged people in a participatory art project. You might have seen the video related to that art project, but we used it as a way to lure people in and talk to them about draft aspects of the plan. So what is their vision? What could it look like? Have them react to some of the goals that the steering committee had developed along the way. We additionally had an open house. We went out to the Neighborhood Leaders Network, so a number of other opportunities that we engaged people in. So this is just a list of some of the different ways and the frequency with which we engaged folks. You can see the commission also did a deeper dive. We helped them do this in terms of reviewing and refining parts of the plan elements, but also researching strategies that other similar communities had. So particularly around their funding strategies for the arts. So that was part of what happened. There was additionally an arts and culture survey. It was almost 360 people responded to that survey, which I think is a really remarkable turnout from just word of mouth, handing out flyers, talking to people. But people are really interested, and to go back and take the time to fill out, a survey that was developed first by the University of Colorado, adopted by the commission, and that we helped to administer, I think is really remarkable and just shows the level of interest that you have here in the community. We also worked with a number of the different departments that were most relevant to arts and culture. So communications, community development and planning was crucial to that, and then also with the neighborhood leader coordinator. So this is very interesting. We base a lot of our work on a study that was done by the Knight Foundation and Gallup, the folks who do the polling across our nation. And they've done a very interesting study across 26 different communities where they look at 9 drivers. Those are there on the screen. And they said of all of these drivers, which we know are important to communities, which really drive community attachment, which make people really love a place or want to live in a place and stay in a place. And so they looked at all of these different ones, and remarkably, it didn't matter what kind of community it was, the top 3 all ended up being the same. We'll show you a quick video on this.
Why do we live where we live? I'm not talking about there. We don't have much of a choice on that one. I'm talking about here. Yeah, I know, wherever we're born, there we are. Our parents pretty much made that choice for us. But once we have the choice, what factors make the place where you live the place where you want to live? And why? You're probably thinking, because it's pretty, with great beaches and parks. Or there's so much to do, like a thriving art scene or a great nightlife. And good schools for your kids, or amazing job opportunities for you. Knight Foundation and Gallup conducted a survey and found that these things, called drivers, are what make people love where they live. Of all the drivers studied, the 3 most important ones stay pretty much the same across the country, even when the economy goes from good to bad. These 3 most important drivers are how open or welcoming a community is to different types of people, how pretty it is, and what type of opportunities there are for people to interact with one another. Drivers like these create what's called resident attachment. It's simply a way of describing how emotionally connected a person is to where they live. Attached residents have a strong pride in their community, a positive outlook on its future, and a sense that it's the perfect place for them. The more attached they are, the less likely they are to leave. This makes for a more talented workforce, a growing population, and genuine satisfaction and pride in their community. And guess what? We found out that communities with residents who like where they live are generally more successful, which leads to a growing local economy. So if drivers like welcoming neighbors, pretty surroundings, and an awesome social scene drive resident attachment, and resident attachment grows the economy, then it makes sense to strengthen these drivers to make the place you live more successful. And that, my friends, is what Soul of the Community is all about.
So a lot of the plan, you'll notice that, is based on this general concept of what drives attachment, and it's not attachment for attachment's sake. We're quite interested in how attachment also helps to drive the economic impact of arts and culture. And so with that in mind, the plan was created, and I think the commission, the steering committee, all the different entities, we all had that as an end goal of art can strengthen the economy, it can fuel growth. What can that look like? So it's not just creating a nice place for people to live and thrive, but it's also, how do you create a more diverse and sustainable economy here in Arvada? So the other thing that we'll do that pulls threads, go ahead.
Excuse me, Nancy?
Can I just ask you one question? On your economic impact of arts and culture, did that include in there all the arts-related stores and things that, where people get supplies for arts-related?
The one that's referenced at the national study, there's nothing that's Arvada specific in there. But there's ones that are looking at both Colorado specific, and it does include those kinds of businesses.
Okay. Because I didn't see it on the one that you gave, because if it didn't include it, it would have even been more.
It's interesting. We can go back and check that, and Mike, but that's, as I recall, it's all businesses related to arts, but it's also how people spend money as it pertains to experiencing the arts. So it's both those. Thanks. So the other piece we did is we really pulled through what are the current commitments. So you all made our life really easy, and that you have an excellent master plan. I know that the next speakers are really looking about a visioning process going forward, thinking about the next, incremental set of years as well. But we really tried to pull through what are the current commitments within your master plans or various different plans. And essentially part of this arts and culture plan is how do you make some of that true that's already been committed to, and how do you put some texture and some layering to it in order to really have it be actionable. So you're very familiar with this. It has different pieces of the vision. We've pulled out the parts we think are particularly relevant to arts and culture, and obviously the third from the last bullet of being a leader in fostering arts and culture is central to that. We also focused quite a lot on the 2017 studies, so this is our Arvada survey and the citizen survey. You'll see we've pulled through some of the major findings from those studies and surveys and really use those as a basis of, in addition to all of the different input that we received throughout the last 6 months, let's also pull on these statistically significant surveys and really pull through some of those recommendations and make sure that the vision, the mission, and the goals were all focused on commitments that were made or findings that have happened in the last couple of months. So the last piece I want to just spend a little bit of time on, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Mike Hughes to talk through the last couple of slides, but one is really just looking at the stakeholder and public survey data. So again, almost 360 residents responded to that, and it was quite a range of feedback that we received. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? Okay.
Thanks very much for providing us with the time to talk through the plan. I'm going to get to the content here in a second. But again, we did an informal survey, found a great deal that we could work with in that survey, not the least of which there is a large arts community here. Many of them feel undervalued, not recognized, and as though they don't really have the kind of place in the community that they would like to have. So that's the last point on your slide. They're eager to dig in. They're looking for a place to do what they do and to bring their work, their artistic expression to the community. We also found some very interesting responses to the plan content itself, much of it very positive. Lastly, I'll just point out on this slide that in asking just how would you evaluate the arts and cultural experiences in the city of Arvada, lots of average and above average. In fact, a substantial number who said that the offerings are average or above average. Only 5% hit excellent. So we think we can increase that number. So then, of course, one of the things that we looked at is on those 3 dimensions that create community attachment, how's Arvada doing already? And the truth is, exceptionally well. There are many things that point to an open and welcoming community. There are extraordinarily beautiful places here and a lot of social offerings. Everything from your commitment to 10 minutes walk to a park to all of the festivals and the rest. But we want to extend from there. So this is the city's first inaugural plan. It is going to set the course for future plans, which we hope will build on the work that the steering committee and the commission have done to get us here. So let's dive into the content. First, a statement of vision. This was easy to come by because when we started talking about what kinds of images people hold and what do they think of first when they think of Arvada, the thing we heard over and over and over again was home. Arvada is home to us. And we began to really think about all the meaning of that one single word. And so we have built a vision around the idea of home and Arvada becoming a home for arts and culture, a place where art and culture live. Then we stepped into mission. So if that's the vision, then what is it that the city might do to make that truer than it is even today? And we have focused on 4 things. The city can take actions that make places that deepen community attachment. The city can invest in the future of arts and culture. The city can help create events for every generation. And finally, the city can take steps to make a home for artists and arts and culture organizations. We then have asked the commission and the steering committee to dig into goals, and I'll just touch on many of those. They have deadlines attached, so our hope is that we will, in this plan, stick to things that are specific and measurable and time-limited, so that you know if you're getting there. So on the first mission, making places that deepen community attachment, we would have been idiots not to notice how central to arts and culture the Arvada Center is, and it is the first thing people said to us. And so our first goal really starts with the Arvada Center. And right down the street, just 2 miles away, though 2 miles is not a short distance, but just 2 miles away, is Old Town. And we believe, and the commission and the steering committee believe, that finding effective ways to hook those two things together, first, just in people's minds, and then second, physically, will make a great difference in arts and culture. So if I'm going to go to a show at the Arvada Center, or I'm going to go to an exhibition at the Arvada Center, I want to be thinking dinner in Old Town. Or if I'm going to be hanging out in Old Town, I want to think, oh, the Arvada Center's right up the street. And so we want to connect those in people's minds, and then ultimately physically connect them. Maybe a shuttle, maybe it's a connection through Uber or Lyft or some other rideshare. But the idea of creating a cultural corridor there is central to the plan. Then we think that's one corner of Arvada, but Arvada stretches pretty far to the west, and so a second hub is possible. We have focused a lot on Gibbs West Park as the obvious place for that. We think between those two, or maybe a third one will emerge that we don't even know about today, that the city could reach for a creative arts district designation. It's a formal designation with the state, and it opens the pipeline for a lot of resources and a lot of publicity, real money that can be used to advance the mission of the district. My hunch is that it's the Old Town Arvada Center connection, and that will become an arts district if the plan is implemented. Then, of course, what we want to focus on is not just the big places, but the small ones, making every neighborhood a place for arts and culture. And then there are these amazing water tanks, and that should be a place that you focus on as well. And that first event needs to be splashy and interesting, and really designate that as a place. So placemaking was the first mission. The second one, investment. These kinds of things can't be done without really priming the pump and putting the resources in the same way that you would invest in a software firm or a high-tech company or a big employer. We know that the arts and culture generate income and jobs in the same way that those industries do, and that takes investment. We believe that the city needs an Office of Cultural Affairs, staff who are dedicated to the mission of arts and culture, and then connect that mission to other parts of the city's organization, parks, and many others. We know you have assets. Some of those are in disrepair. We think fixing the wall at the Arvada Center is a first commitment, but really taking care and stewarding the resources is important. And then fourth, building the capacity and visibility by having the commission really participate across the state. Making a name for Arvada is another way to invest. The third one, events, and Arvada is event central. Again, Chocolate Affair and St. Patrick's Day and many, many more arts and ales. We have been fortunate enough to arrive here at the same time that the University of Colorado's Department of Music Industry has also made their presence known here and has become part of this. They are working hard to create some events, new events, that are going to broaden to a new audience. An event called the Tour de Park, where art events go on at different parks, and then people move from park to park. So you tour the parks and get a different arts experience. We think the skate park is a phenomenal asset that has real bounce for arts and cultural events, and CU is working hard on a skate park event. So more events, more kinds of events, and then more people on the commission, a broader reach to different generations and different parts of the community. And then lastly, make a home for artists and arts and culture. Artists are finding it very, very hard in this region to find affordable housing, to find affordable workspace, to find live workspace, to find places where their galleries can be, places where they can rehearse, places that are large enough to do what they do. And so there are some things that Arvada can do to make the code friendlier, to help identify those places that can be made permanently affordable for artists. And those things got repeated. So that slide should only have 3 things, not 5. So that's mission 4. So 4 missions, a set of goals underneath those, and that's the gist of the plan. So we're ready for questions, or happy to talk, or to have the commission and steering committee
Okay.
members weigh in.
We'll have some questions for you. Mr. Pfeiffer?
Yeah, Mark, the fees we pick for parks, is any of those fees eligible for some of this, or does that have to be for parkland? Does anyone know that? Well, so if you go to mission 2 for me on your screen.
The fees that are, you mean the development fees collected for parks?
Yeah, those.
No, those I think really have to be used for parks and open space kinds of projects.
Is there an opportunity maybe to widen that scope, that this could be an option for it to be, or is there rules? Is it our rules? Is it state rules? Who says that?
You know, I think probably that I would have to get back to council on
Okay.
that. The concern I would have is even if we were to enlarge the applicability of those fees for arts, that would diminish really what we have available to collect for parks and open space.
Did you have any thoughts around this mission 2 that they put up here?
Well, usually when something like that is suggested, that is usually translated into some sort of a new development fee, some sort of a funding stream that's legislated against capital projects or development in order to provide a funding stream for public art or some sort of arts programs.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, other questions from council? Nancy Ford.
I'm going to take a few minutes. By the way, I absolutely loved your report. I thought you did a great job on it. I wanted to add some comments and just ask some questions as well. On page 3, where you talk about employee engagement and you talk about community engagement, I would like to see, in addition to highly attached residents are more likely to contribute actively to a community's growth and remain living in the city and remain living in Arvada, because I think that I just heard a report this morning about people starting to move out of Colorado for reasons, having to do with change. And I think that it's very important to realize that people, if they become unhappy or not engaged for whatever reason, whether it's aesthetic change or openness change or whatever it might be, they may then decide to not stay. And you do mention, excuse me, you do mention on that same page about aesthetics, a beautiful place. We don't often talk about aesthetics on city council, and so because you have it here, I just want to emphasize that in your paragraph, you talk about our parks, which really are a fine asset for Arvada. But I also want us to think about the building aesthetics in Arvada as well, because I think that has an important piece from what I can understand from constituents and respondent residents who've talked to me. I also wanted to, these are minor, but they're not, because I think that they have some importance. You talk about on page 5 about Arvadans love their parks and recreation. And I want to also include in there, or I would love to see included in there, that parks not only provide opportunities for being outside, but parks also provide opportunities for people to breathe and to think. And I think that that's a very important, especially, when we talk about innovation and creativity, to be able to have a place where one can go and to have openness and natural beauty and a place to truly, literally as well as figuratively breathe. I think that's very important. The other thing that came up when I was reading your report was this sense of community attachment as it has to do with home ownership. And I've been asking for this in many situations, but I think that, in reading that, you would think that that is the case, that it is common sense, if you will, that when people own, they're going to feel more attached. But I'd really love to see some data that suggests that that really is the case, because we have an unusually high rate of ownership and of single-family homes in Arvada. And I do think, and plus I've observed that we have a lot of long-term residents here as well. So I would think those two factors, long-term residents, has to do with the fact that we have high ownership rates, and all of that, I believe, leads to our tremendous commitment and community engagement in Arvada. We have a high rate of interest even when it comes to being on committees. Hold on, I just want to make sure I have nothing else here. I had a lot of things here.
Do you want to look through your material while Mr. McGough
Sure.
asks a couple questions?
Sure.
Mr. McGough, you want
Thanks.
to ask a
Okay,
question?
yes, thank you. Just wanted to follow up on the slide, the stakeholder public and survey data. The first bullet point there, when asked to rate Arvada's arts and culture, only 5% of the respondents rated them as excellent, et cetera. And I'm wondering, do we get the word out on all the things that are going on in Arvada? And I ask that from the perspective of, I participate in a lot of cultural activities in Arvada, and the audience is pretty slim very often. And I'm wondering if we've got the word out there, or when you do that survey, whether people are aware of all the cultural activities that are in fact there. So I guess my question is, have you done or will you be doing an inventory, a listing of all of the cultural activities that go on and that are currently going on in Arvada?
So we don't have a detailed inventory as part of the plan, but one of the questions that we did ask was, what is it that gets in the way of participation? And we offered a set of examples, or a set of choices, and then gave them an other, and got a very long list. And we put things like transportation and parking and those kinds of things. And lack of awareness was near the top of the list. It was one of the things that people cited over and over again. I didn't know about this event. I didn't hear about this event. People don't know about these things. So we found the same thing in the informal survey, not scientific. We didn't do a scientific sample, but in the informal survey, we found the lack of awareness rose pretty high. So same thing.
Yeah, that would seem to me to be a major issue, and one that should probably be addressed, because when I think of all the things that go on, whether it's the Historical Society, the programs besides the regular performances, et cetera, at the Arvada Center and its partnership with Regis University, for example, all the things that go on at the various schools within our community, the churches, various service organizations. There's a lot of things going on, and the art exhibits within homes and within smaller venues. I just think there's a great deal here, and so when I see only 5% consider the offerings to be excellent, I think a major problem is that of awareness, as you have discovered. But somehow or another, it seemed with the cultural master plan, we have to have some mechanism for pulling all that information together, and at least people who are or proclaim an interest would have access to that information. So I hope you would go there. I even think about things like, I have a friend who has a poetry garden in the northern part of the city, up by Stanley Lake. It's a cultural thing for his neighborhood where people stop by and post poems, post photos, post their thoughts, and people stop and read them as they go by. I would also just, I'm wondering about activities like several of the cities have done one book, one Denver, or one Colorado. What about one book, one Arvada, that kind of thing? Are we looking at those kinds of things as an inventory to say, what do we have, what might we have that are low cost and easily implemented?
Yeah, there are two strategies that I didn't highlight that I'm happy to go back to in Mission 4. And these are going to start as student projects with CU, but will be transferred to the city, and hopefully through this plan will continue on. The first is a newsletter. So that people are more aware of the events and more aware of the artists that live and work in Arvada. So you can, through that newsletter, highlight the activities of different artists or announce upcoming events, those kinds of things. And the second is a database of the artists who are already here and who may just not be the poets, the writers, the historians. So we're thinking about arts and culture very broadly, but create that database so that people are simply aware of one another's presence in the community. And so the newsletter and the database should help a great deal in getting those two things started.
Okay, well, I hope we'll get that word out, because I think of the many, many organizations in the community that have programs that relate to arts and culture, whether it's the Senior Community Center or Majestic View Park, the Apex Center. There's lots of things going on all the time, but I think we have a hard time getting that information, and a mechanism for doing that I think would be helpful.
No doubt.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Just a couple of questions. I'm just curious, on the survey, how many of the, got 360 responses, which is good, out of how many? What was the number, and how did you determine where those got sent?
So,
I can help
yeah,
you
good.
there. We actually pushed it out through every communication tool we could, through social media, through our e-newsletter. There were hundreds of flyers handed out at the St. Patrick's Day Festival. What am I missing? And the Kite Festival, excuse me. And there was a window of about, I don't know, two to 3 weeks where that survey was live and available. So it went out to every resident that, any way that we could possibly get it out there. So, again, it's not scientifically, statistically accurate, but one would assume people who are interested in the arts, it was on Nextdoor, it was on all of these things. So, but we were really pleased with the number of responses. And in addition to just the data that, that came out, we got pages and pages of comments from folks, things that they'd like to see, things that are disappointed in, or whatever.
Well, and I thank you, because I did see it on Nextdoor. So I was just curious. So we didn't obviously do a mailing. We did social media.
No, it was completely free.
Yeah, no, that's even better. Now, I would agree with a lot of what Mr. McGough said about communication and awareness. There are a lot of people on the northwest side of town that don't even know where the Arvada Center is. And so there's step number one, is communicating where the Arvada Center is so that they can then find out what the programming is. So this is a question for staff. As it relates to in mission number 2 goals, to double the general fund commitment to the Arts Commission and Public Art Program, what do we have dedicated today?
Currently, the city contributes $50,000 a year for what is defined as acquisition and maintenance of public art. That being said, we've used the funds after consultation with the finance director for some other things, including the ability to have a consultant do this master plan. When the Arts and Culture Commission started in April of 2017, they had a budget of, I want to say about $250,000 because the money had accumulated over the course of several years. A large portion of those funds were then used to rehabilitate the blue wall at the Arvada Center. So following the completion of this master plan, we'll probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of $150,000. I can tell you that the list of maintenance projects is long. The estimate to fully repair the, I hate to call it the dirt wall, I think there's a more formal title for it, but the estimated cost for that is over $100,000. We have a request to refurbish squiggles to the tune of about $18,000. So really, as a commission, they've talked about the fact that we have an inventory of public art that we own. A lot of it sits at the Arvada Center, most of it sits at the Arvada Center, but there's some even here in this building. And we have an obligation to maintain it. If we accept a free donation of a sculpture, we have an obligation to maintain that. So the $50,000 really looking forward on a strategic plan is barely enough to just maintain what we have, let alone acquire anything new. So the idea of doubling that would be $50,000 to $100,000 a year, which would at least assist in perhaps acquiring a few new pieces. But they've also talked about, if you look around at what other cities are doing, for example, I think it's Longmont or Loveland, or maybe it's both. They have a revolving art program, so you'll see in some of the medians in the major parts of town, they'll have sculptures that are put in place, and they're on loan to the city. And so one of the things when the consultants were talking about placemaking is perhaps as medians are constructed, that you create platforms for, where you could place something on a temporary basis that adds interest to the area.
Well, that was going to be my next question, is what are other cities doing? I look at at Golden, and I don't know exactly how they've arrived at all of their art, but when you drive through downtown Golden, there's some pretty cool pieces that are along the sidewalks and roadways and in their roundabouts. And is that art that Golden owns, or do we know? I
would ask the commissioner or Michael or Janess to maybe address some of the research. Dee Mountain Riser, the chair of the commission, and a lot of the commission members have done a lot of research on what other cities are doing. So Dee?
Yeah, I've spoken to the people that work in the city of Golden, and a lot of their program, they do have full-time staff that coordinate most of their arts and cultural programming, but also the Art in Public Places program. They have a lot of artwork that's been donated to them in various shapes and forms and things like that. It's one of the issues that came up in a research earlier, that some of them are kind of like mass-produced knockoffs, that they were actually having a lot of problems convincing people that they needed to continue to maintain, because they fall apart just as quickly as they weren't really created as an individual piece or as a one-time art piece. So they have a situation with that going on right now, or within the last year or two. But they do a lot of the same things with call for artists and fund new projects, and then had a couple conversations with their director. I can't remember his name right now, of course, but he was talking to me about the kinds of things where they were bringing in the funding for the maintenance programs and all the stuff that we were talking about as well, when we kind of realized that the money that we're getting now isn't really going to be enough to even maintain what we own. So we're going to have to expand some of that and look for other ways to fund it. So, and I guess that kind of answer your question about
No, yeah, thank you. Okay. So, as we look at, kind of the ask on doubling to 100,000, and then you think about a full-time employee and the cost of that employee, is there enough, funding, even with 100,000, to do that? Do we know what level of pay grade that type of an employee would need or want?
I think a full compensation for the kind of professional employee that we're talking about here is well over $100,000 when you add in benefits and other costs to support that employee.
Okay, so it adds up quickly. My last question is, from the and I'll be the first to admit, I love art, but I don't know how to judge it or to what's good or what's bad. I wouldn't probably know if there was a knockoff, walking down the street. But how do we, I'm sure you know the answer to this question, but what's the conversation with the artists to put things on loan, or to talk to people like Greg Stevenson who give lots of art, to make those kinds of donations, end quote, to the city of Arvada?
I can give it a shot too, and then, yeah. I do want to point out that we have established an artist's inventory. So to your question, Mr. McGough, we're definitely, starting on trying to get it. Believe it or not, before this process started, we did not have a thorough inventory of just what we own in public art. So one of our commission members, Rochelle Bennett, is an expert at this and has been helping with that. But in any event, we do have an artist inventory. The prospect of putting a call out and saying, hey, would you loan us? That's certainly a possibility. We also, as you've seen come before you over the years, I remember a couple years ago, the Arvada Center coming and we had been offered a sculpture, which the city accepted. It was free to us, except, again, once you accept that, you have an obligation to maintain it. We had a sculpture, just it's a large rock. It's very attractive. It sits out at the wastewater facility. It was donated to us by an artist who lives on the West Coast, and he happened to be visiting and saw that it had tilted or something, and so we ended up spending about $1,700 just to fix it. So even the donations, if we do it properly, we have to do it properly. We are obligated to do that.
Okay, and then I heard that maybe the big blue Bronco out at the airport might be available. So that's all I've got.
Do you want me to address the conversations that?
Yeah.
If we move forward with something like an art on loan project, which is something I'm going to start to push for because I think it's a great idea, where we really only have to develop spaces to put them. We have to develop some means of attracting artists to kind of want to come to Arvada and display their work. But we already have people like Colin Parson that have been doing that up at the Arvada Center. And then, of course, I've had conversations recently with the people at Lafayette that run their arts and culture department. And as Maria said, between Lafayette, Longmont, and Loveland, happen to be all L's, and we just looked into all those programs. They're all doing the same kinds of things. So I've had those conversations with people already, and it seems like it's not going to be a very difficult thing to do because there's always artists that are looking to kind of like promote themselves and promote their work, of course. And if we give them an opportunity to do that, I think they'll be clamoring to want us to do that for them or help them do that. So open calls, kind of inventory, things that we know where the places are that we want to put them. When we start to develop that inventory, we'll have an opportunity to tell people, okay, here's a great place for, see who wants to, write a proposal for us or send us a proposal. And then there's a multitude of available things online, like Cafe, which is an open call for artists, and other things like through Colorado Creative Industries and other mail lists and things like that, that we can start to bring in art from all over the state and all over the areas, or even out of the state if we wanted to push it that far.
Right.
So we definitely have plenty of opportunities, and I don't think we're going to have any shortage of people wanting to volunteer art for an art on loan program.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to the commission for the work that you're doing to try and bring and revive and make us a little more culturally sound.
Nancy Ford.
David, I also want to mention that Loveland has a number of galleries where the city of Fort Collins used to get a lot of their sculptures in their old town. The gallery would actually loan the work, so it's advantageous for them as well because they're advertising their business. So there are many places to get art for sure. What wall, Maria, are we talking about at the Arvada Center? Are we talking about the wall with the vine?
No. That was the blue wall.
Okay.
What's the formal name of the blue wall? Skyline.
Is that the
blue
east?
wall with the silvery? What is it?
The vines.
That has been repaired. That cost
Right.
over $100,000 to repair. The dirt wall, the earthen wall, it runs along much of the building, both interior and exterior. It's a glass and metal structure that has striations of different
Okay.
types of earth in it.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay, thank you. On page 14, Mike, this is where I think we have a tremendous advantage with the Neighborhood Liaison Program. But I'd like to just point out, you talk about that the program should encourage art projects. And I would just like to say that I think it should enable the projects, because when we talk about encouraging, firsthand I think of the city doing the encouragement. And one example that I would give is at Far Horizons, when our finance director's, our own finance director's daughter designed a beautiful sign for the neighborhood. And that really, it was all neighborhood-led. Actually, she led it, and it just wound up being a great engagement piece for that area. So that's why I think it's really important that we, that the neighborhoods be the ones to lead. In terms of the water tanks, in conversations that we've had, I know that a number of them were brought up, but how many tanks do we actually have in Arvada that could be used for art?
They're specifically referring to the 2 water tanks on Kipling Ridge that are out of commission now.
Okay, and then there was another one, wasn't there, up in Candelas, or?
I don't think there was an idea of a water tank that is in use by our utilities department as part of this program. I think it's just the 2 that are out of commission on Kipling Ridge.
Okay. And then in the report, certainly because it's an Arts and Culture Commission, a lot was mentioned about arts. But do you have any comments on how history could be greater implemented? Our history in Arvada could be greater implemented through the neighborhood program or through the Arts and Culture Commission? Celebrating and recognizing our actual historic monuments or buildings or some type of events, or?
That's a really good point. I think we are loving the idea about focusing on neighborhoods, because you do have a neighborhood coordinator, because it's so clear in the visioning process that people think of Arvada as home. And so to build out culturally, that's such a cultural touch point here in Arvada. So we haven't specifically thought about pulling on that thread, but we will between now and the next conversation then, because that makes a lot of sense of how do we build that out, because there's a lot of avenues you could do that from a historical perspective, from thinking about local storytelling, a whole number of different thoughts on that. I don't know if you have any specific ideas you'd like us to consider.
Well, one of the things that I'm just thinking about, and I don't yet, I'd have to really think about that, but just as we are getting a lot of new residents coming into Arvada, to be able to maintain our history from, in terms of areas of Arvada where historical, most of our historical districts or historic districts are, include Old Town and then are right next to Old Town on either side. And then there's a 4th one out west, which I think most people don't even know about. But I think there's probably some history that could truly be expanded, and I think that certainly would create greater attachment to one's neighborhood when they understand what was there at one time, or how things developed and so forth. On page 16, you talk about age and how younger residents feel less connected and attached to the community. And My guess is that we could probably find research on that as well, just from the fact that younger people are at a different stage in life. Generally, it's older people who get more involved. But I think that I just wanted to comment and say that I do think it's very important, as you mentioned here, to get to hear more from younger people who will affect the future. And one of the things that I think would be really exciting, you mentioned the tour of the parks, but I think one of the things that would be truly exciting for neighborhoods is concerts in parks. Because, I think of my own park, Arvada Volunteer Firefighters Park. I know that there were many nights when the volunteer firefighters were practicing their bagpipes. And it's just a wonderful sensation to hear live music near your home. And, how easy would it be to just have neighbors drag a few light lawn chairs down to a park and listen to, a wonderful concert, maybe, opportunities provided to students. We have some great musicians, I'm sure, in Arvada, and I think that would be a lot of fun.
Okay. Mr. Pfeiffer?
I'm not done yet.
Oh, you're not done yet?
Thank you.
Okay.
I also wanted to ask you, on the creative industries, are we sending anybody to Greeley this year for the creative industries?
I'm going, and another member is going. He's away right now.
Okay, perfect. And then just one other, two comments I have. On page 22, I think that, you talk about art is for everyone. And I think that it's very important for us and for people when they're reading this document to truly understand how important art is in our lives. And because a lot of times I believe people think of art and these types of projects as, well, that's something different. That's elitism. It's not, it really doesn't affect my life. And I think it never hurts to put a statement somewhere or a few statements that discuss how art truly affects everybody's life individually, whether you're a concert goer or an Arvada Center goer or not. We still wear clothing that's been designed. We have cars that are designed. We each listen to music. Our homes are designed. All of these aspects are critical in making for a better life. And I think people really need to understand that that's really what art is about. It's not just sculpture in a park. It's really, we interact with art all the time on a regular basis. And then one last comment, I would just like to say that the city actually owns an absolutely beautiful collection of art. Unfortunately, not a lot of people get to see that because much of that is hung in the Arvada Center and in the offices here. And it might be a nice idea at some point for residents to actually get to see the art that they own because it's really beautiful. So. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you for your good work.
Mr. Pfeiffer?
Thank you, Mr. Marriott. I'm sorry, second bite here. I don't really have questions, so I'll make it quick, just more comments on the subject. For my friend David Jones, judging art, you say that, and if it provokes, thought or conversation, I think it's good art. So it doesn't matter if it's fake or not. You started the conversation. One area, I do believe that there should be a sustainable funding source of some sort that doesn't create a huge impact, which sounds like you guys will work through that. But I being on the Arvada Center, the old art boards that were around, it was never enough, to maintain the art. And I think the art we bought was that red thing. I can't think of it, the name of it.
The windmill.
The windmill that sits in the front.
When
it got on the cover of the Arvada Center magazine, it just became like the biggest topic. It became an icon that references the Arvada Center, and so therefore we spent the 6 digits plus, which was almost all the money to to acquire it, but just because it was so recognized with the Arvada Center. I would like to see more of that happen. When I think of public art, I think of communities like Fort Collins, Loveland, Longmont, even Louisville, Lakewood, Golden. I can name them all, and I can tell you what art is where. And sometimes you can actually distinguish a location to meet somebody by the art that's there. And I hope Arvada gets there, because the only art we have is the large beacon. That's the largest thing in here, which is the Arvada, the water tower. And that is a conversational piece, but it would be nice if there was more of it throughout our city. So my thought is, I hope we put together a program that really publicizes and really promotes this loan of public art. I think that's a great opportunity to promote artists' art that sometimes sits in their garage or in their backyard. Because some of the art, when I dealt with the Arvada Center folks, it's amazing how many artists we have in the city, but their art's not shared really anywhere but maybe another city, another state, or Denver. It's not even in their own backyard, in their home, which is getting it out and getting it visible. And I think that visibility will hopefully create some income for that artist. So I hope we really promote that and focus on how we can improve that relationship. I hope we can find also a way where maybe we need to start thinking about there's so much development going on, and when we do multi-story or dense doings or retail, I think there's somewhere in here we need to think together about putting some form of art, or how the developer puts some form of art into it. The most exciting ones that I've seen that are around culture and art was, I don't know the name of the development, but it's next to Red Rocks. It's going up right now in Kipling. They're all going to put artwork throughout the property. And so we were very excited about that, because I think there was a relationship with the school with that. And then also, I went blank. Next to Stinger, the apartments that are going up. I went blank.
Timberline.
Timberline. Thank you very much, John. Timberline, it's cultural, because the whole concept, we'll see when it's done. But the concept was to teach agricultural. They were going to have like a coop, and they were going to have a farm, and an active farm, and plots. And so the idea there was to connect to its roots, to the property it took over. But maybe there's some way we can pepper conversation with developers around the subject, even if it's a little thing, but it might make it fun. The two last things I have, one is the Arvada Center and awareness out west. That's been an age-old discussion about how do you get people out west to understand what the Arvada Center is, and it is the taxpayers' art center and humanities. And we need to figure out how to connect the Arvada Center and the west somehow, some way. I don't know what and how, but it needs to have some relationship out west. And then the last thing, I just want to just caution a little bit around duplicate efforts. I hear a lot of festival commission. I hear, if I was to look at master plans, I think there's some crossover with the parks master plan, the arts and cultural master plan, which you're doing now, the Arvada Center master plan, the festival commission. I want to make sure that we have real clarity, and that we're not creating duplicate effort. And then when I say real clarity, I want to make sure that we know who's doing what, because we don't want to say, okay, the Arts and Cultural Commission is going to make some sort of festivals, and what is the Festival Commission doing? So I make sure that this master plan identifies, I think, those relationships and who owns them and so forth. We only have so much staff to handle these things, so I think that's all I have. Thank you, John.
Mr. McGough, did you have something else?
I'm gonna
Okay.
pass.
So I want to make a couple of comments. I think what you're looking for out of this workshop is you'd like to bring this master plan, this cultural master plan forward. So what my comments are going to be about is I understand the need for and the desire for whether it's additional funding or a different funding source, and or a full-time equivalent to be a staff person for it. And I believe we're staffing it already, the Cultural Commission. Am I correct on that, Maria, that the city's already staffing that, so there's kind of a little bit more buried costs in there. I would encourage you with this master plan to maybe look at it speaking two ways. Well, that may be a desire. There's lots of things that are desired here in the city that we can spend money on, that are services and whatnot for our citizens. And so I would like to make sure that as you bring this forward, that whether it has two paths forward or some alternatives, but that I think this, this cultural master plan can speak to what's possible even with, if no additional funding were to materialize. So I would just make sure as it kind of gets in its final form, that that's contemplated as an option as well. And then on the funding piece, I think I think it's difficult, very difficult to contemplate a decision that stays going forward as an additional funding piece. Of course, it's much easier for me to contemplate our one-time funds allocation that we do annually, because we get to decide on that kind of every year. So you might think of it from that standpoint, if you were to be able to get additional funding, but not in a programmatic or a regular type of an increment, that it may come in some years, may not come in other years, may come in larger amounts or smaller amounts, that how can the master plan kind of be sensitive to looking at that. So that would be just my input to you guys on the way back. So with that, I think thank you very much. It was very informative, as you can see by all the questions that it raised. There's lots of attention being paid to it. So thank you for your thorough, in-depth look at it for us here tonight, and good luck coming back here in June. Okay, so you bet. Before we move on to our next item, which is our community visioning proposal, I'm going to suggest we take a quick stand up and in place for a couple minutes and take a quick stretch, and then be right back. Yeah.
It's a day of money.
It's a good time. What are those maps?
That's the parks.
Are they new or?
No, I hand them out as we go.
You hand them out to everybody you do hikes?
Yeah, everybody who's, so I
But
just
they're
needed.
not a recent map, are they?
Well, the last couple of years, we updated
no,
the.
I would have
Yeah,
one.
so yeah, I have a supply so that as I get new people, they don't have a map, I get the maps out to them.
Absolutely. Best way to distribute those, because they don't go from their hand right in the trash can. Somebody who's gone out hiking with us is going to really value it.
Yeah, and if they haven't done it before, I'll take a little time at the end of the hike and spread out the map so they can see where they are and where their house is and where they can hike and that kind of thing. So I picked up 30 of them, and I probably go through 50 a year or something like that. I have a little container in my vehicle and keep a stash of them.
I'll take another one, actually. I think I have one in there, and I think one's in the garage, but it would be nice to just have one.
Oh, yeah, there's many mistakes on it. Right. The historical document, it's got to be accurate, and so they're updating, and that should be out within the next couple months at most.
In this file?
Okay, if
No, it's
everybody
just
would
a
like to
separate
take their
publication.
seats here, we'll get going with our second workshop tonight, which is our community visioning project. Mr. Devon?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of council. It was actually about a year ago, almost to the date, that we presented a workshop on community visioning, April 24th, 2017. And it was, as a result of that discussion, the council directed staff to not move forward with any efforts along those lines. Back during the council retreat in January, we discussed at length, and actually even before that, during a workshop in early January, we discussed at length the results from the citizen survey. And while the citizen survey did indicate that 82% of the respondents in our community are satisfied with the quality of life in Arvada, there are other results that suggested, and I think the council felt the same way, that we ought to look deeper into some of the responses. For example, there are some concerns about whether or not our community is heading in the right or wrong direction. Concerns were expressed in association with the city's direction that there's too much growth, poor management, and there's concerns about the condition of infrastructure. There are some other concerns regarding government transparency and transportation. Following the retreat, or during the retreat, the idea of the community visioning project was brought up again. Council asked staff to look into this idea and bring it back again for future discussion. And that's what we're doing tonight. One of the things that came about as a result of further engagement and discussion of community visioning is that we felt there could be a very good connection with our revised and much more robust neighborhood engagement program, Neighbors Connected. And I know council has received some information on that program in the past. And so looking at the idea of both programs, of that program working together with the community visioning project, a revised proposal has been developed, which will, I think, work better in terms of gathering information and engaging some of the citizens that we've come to get involved in with the things that we're doing through the neighborhood engagement program, Neighbors Connected. And tonight we have brought back Christine Chopiak and Barbara Lewis to make another presentation. The revised program, because of the connection with city staff and with the neighborhood engagement program, has been reduced by more than 2/3, or about 2/3, from about $130,000 to about $52,000. So presentation has been prepared tonight, and I would ask either Chris to come up and make the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for coming.
Good evening. Thank you for having us, too. It's good to be back here. And I was commenting to some of the staff when I was meeting with them earlier how fast things are growing around Denver, and I can see it here in Arvada, too. So thank you so much for taking some time to let us walk you through our proposal and answer any questions you might have. So I'll get right at it. So with the information from the community survey, the citizen survey, and also the revitalization of the neighborhood engagement program, we were able in our proposal to really focus the desired outcomes of what a visioning process for the city of Arvada might look like. The first thing would be to illuminate the strengths of the city, to be able to build on that community survey and other resources that you have available, is to actually amplify some of the community pride we heard discussed earlier in looking at the arts and culture and what makes for attachment to community. So to really amplify that pride by getting people from all different walks of Arvada to come together to talk about what they love about Arvada and what they see for its future. To build and expand on the neighborhood engagement, you heard Mark talk about that. I don't think I need to belabor that point. To leverage some of those community and neighborhood leaders to actually engage more and different kinds of people in this visioning process, maybe some of the people that weren't reached by the community survey, and to engage them in conversations about what really matters to them and how they brings that what matters to them to the front so we can help use it to inform the strategic plan. And then that builds on my last point, is that to use the recommendations that come out of this engagement opportunity to inform the first step of the development of the strategic plan. So you might observe, it really narrowed the focus of what you would get for this kind of project. So we envision 4 phases to the project. The first one is really project organization, and this is where we would work with city and other stakeholders, especially people from the neighborhood engagement group, as well as members of council, to develop a timeline, really articulate what are the processes we want to use, and we've refined those processes. You'll notice that in phases 2 and 3. And what does it mean to be engagement ready? How do we get the community and the staff and all the support systems ready in terms of communication and making sure that our timeline doesn't conflict with any important events that are happening at the city, as well as summer. We were talking, summer is a hard time to get people. People are very engaged, just not necessarily coming together. So we want to make sure we plan it correctly. Phase 2 is the community launch. And this really builds on the architecture, and one of the focus points of appreciative inquiry is really conducting a series of interviews and using those neighborhood engagement leaders to actually train them, have them help us build an interview guide, train them in how to conduct these interviews, and then going across the city to conduct some of those one-on-one interviews, mini meetings, and that sort of thing to help illuminate some themes that will arise out of those conversations when Arvada is at its best, and what do you see for the future, is moving that conversation to help inform phase 3, which is what we're calling a citywide community conversation. And that's really where the data and the information we gather, the conversations that we have with citizens in phase 1, will synthesize and aggregate that, present a set of themes, and then bring members of the community in a large summit format to actually have some very focused discussion on the future for the city of Arvada. And then phase 4 is aggregating phases 2 and 3, conversing with council, vetting thematic areas to the city and to the neighborhood engagement group, and then being able to produce a report. So 4 different phases of the project. What we see as some of the benefits of doing this project is that, especially with the arts and culture master plan, some of the other master plans that were referenced earlier, as well as the revitalization of the neighborhood engagement work, this is not a standalone project. As I look back in our presentation to you last April, it felt very much like a standalone project, but now I'm seeing this convergence within the city of a lot of opportunity to take advantage of build on the survey, but build on this other engagement to be able to align and link and help dispel some of the mystery about where are we going, and allowing people to voice the opportunities that they see and also some of the concerns that they have within the city. Lower costs, so Barbara and I were preparing for this evening. It's like, okay, so inevitably somebody at council is going to say, okay, how come it's so much less money? It is lower cost for a couple of main reasons. The first one is that we got rid of, we only focused on one large community event and several smaller interviews and mini meetings to take advantage of your investment in the neighborhood engagement process. So the fact that that's been revitalized, you have staff already built into this project, makes it much easier and much less expensive in terms of our time to be able to link with those different things and be able to do that. I think the other thing is that you have gathered, I've spent a lot of time looking at your community survey, and you've gathered a lot of data that we can build on so that we don't need to do a lot of that discovery as part of this process. Another benefit is that it just helps inform your 6-year strategic plan. So you're at a place in 2019 to begin thinking about that again. So as council goes into retreat in January of 2019, you'll have a lot of information in terms of testimonials, but a lot of artifact coming out of this visioning process to inform the next year's strategic plan. And I think that that's it for this part. I want to turn it over to Barbara. You have in front of you some slides. Mark asked us to provide some additional examples of where we've done this kind of work before. And so, Barbara, if you want to come on.
Hey, Barbara, welcome.
Thanks
for coming
much.
tonight.
It's great to be here. We just wanted to give you a handout that says, give a little bit about the track record for this kind of a appreciative inquiry approach in government. And so I just want to touch on a few things. One project we did was the Eagle P3 project, and that was City of Denver wanted us to use this process to strengthen the partnership with RTD and the private contractor so that they could actually get the job done. So we were able to use this process for them to come up with some principles for collaborative excellence. And those principles were actually applied to really meaty, thorny things like permit review and escalation in a big project, and help them work better together. And I think the evidence of that is that one of the engineers said that 4 years later, he was working with his RTD counterpart, and he said, you know, it took us 45 minutes to do what it used to take 2 hours to do, and that's because of this process. So those strengthened relationships improved their partnership. Another project that I'd highlight is last year we did the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and in their instance, they were trying to vision with the people who don't go to the museum. So that's kind of challenging. But they found that we were able to reach those people. They got a vision, they got a lot of innovation, and they said, you were able to do what we've been trying to do for 30 some odd years. How did you do it? And it was through this process. We recently did the strategic plan for Adams 12 School District. We're kind of finishing that up now. But that process, we engaged 3,000 people in person in the fall and about 3,500 via surveys. And then we had 250 people come together to kind of make meaning of that data and to set priorities. So those are just some examples. Chris, do you want to speak about Delaware? Sure. Okay.
Another description you have is the fourth slide in the deck that you have there is I worked with the Department of Education in the state of Delaware along with the Foundation for Science and Mathematics Education, and they had experienced a pretty rocky road over a period of time, and it was looking like the foundation was going to pull its funding. The foundation is primarily funded by the private sector, and of course State Department of Education's public sector. And so really through an appreciative inquiry process that we worked with them, they were able to renew their relationship, revitalize their areas of focus, put a laser focus on the work that they wanted to do in science education, and get a 5-year commitment and investment in their community and their students.
Okay, great, thank you. I think we have some questions for you. Mr. McGough?
Yes, thank you. I'm still having some difficulty with understanding the product of this projected or proposed program. That was we're going to build a community-based vision. Does that mean we're trying to foretell what may happen to us? Is it trying to construct what we want to happen within our community?
So I think
what is the product?
Yeah, so I think the way that we framed this up is that this is the first step in your strategic planning process of where is the city of Arvada going, and using a community-based approach to help people inform that decision.
But is it a statement that is that the product, that there will be a vision statement at the end of this process?
We envision potentially a statement, but more importantly, key themes or areas that are important to the community that they would like the city to focus on over the next 6 years.
but that still comes down to being a statement of some kind,
It could
doesn't
be, yes.
I mean, what other possible way would there be if it's not a statement, whether it's in different areas or one combined statement?
Well, thematic.
What else could it be?
So, for example, infrastructure might emerge as one of the key themes that's really important to the community, with a list of things that are underneath for your consideration in terms of the strategic plan. It could be arts and culture after the arts and culture master plan.
I think we're still kind of missing each other. I'm still wondering, in what form, what is the product? Is it a written statement, whether it's a list of possibilities or whatever the title is?
Well, what we envision is that, yes, it's going to be a statement, but you're going to have a whole bunch of data and information that has been informed by these different neighborhood groups about what they see as important and for the future of Arvada. So it's a statement, but there is the final product that is a report that says, based on all these people surveyed, all these people who were talked to, and the community at large, this is the information that we got from them.
The information that we got. Mm-hmm. So it's only information? There's not
I mean, it's hard for me to say right at this moment because this is not a off-the-shelf process. It would be working very closely with your community engagement folks and the city staff to say, based on everything we know from the community survey and based on what we don't know, the questions that we haven't asked, how do we go about designing a process to get a fuller picture of the city of Arvada in 6 years' time? And yes, I mean, part of it is not imagining, but it is tapping into the citizens' desires, wants, and needs in terms of city and its infrastructure and what's important to them. Barbara, do you want to add anything?
Okay, but it does sound like the product is the process itself then, is that right?
The process generates the product, which is the vision statement, but it's also priorities for action.
A vision statement.
And it's also the priorities for action, so that it's almost like the first step of your strategic plan.
Okay, that's what I want to know. Thank you.
Okay, other questions from council? Mr. Pfeiffer?
So I mean, I like the concept, but now after hearing Mr. McGough ask some questions, I'm trying to understand what is the relationship between what your product will be versus the citizen survey and the strategic plan we already have. It sounds like there's duplication. You're just taking our information and then resending it to us?
What we're doing is taking what came out as primary areas of focus in the citizen survey, and we're working with the community to find out more specifically, digging more deeply to understand what is it that you want and what are your priorities, so that when you begin your you're about to update your strategic plan. So when you do that, you're like, ready to launch, if you will.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, like I said, it's like that first step. Whenever, if you look at that Elevate project I mentioned for Adams 12, in that instance, we were asking people, we asked the parents, students, teachers, administrators, community members, what do you see as the strengths of the district? What do you see as, what are your hopes and dreams for the future, and what are your ideas to make it happen? And we ended up with like 6,000 responses on that. And then we worked with a core team to understand really what are the high-level themes here. And then we had this large event of 250 people where basically we looked at, here are the focus areas, given all this input. Like, it's really hard to take a lot of input from the public, you know that, in your positions, and hone it down into what are publicly supported directions. So that's what came out of that event. So we're digging deeper, we're getting new voices to the table, and we're coming forward with a vision statement, a characterization of what people love about Arvada, what they take the most pride in, and then the focus areas, much more detailed understanding of what they'd like to see happen in the future and their ideas to make it happen.
Would you ever see a conflict between, or not an alignment between our citizen survey and this participation of these events?
I think there'll be alignment because of the fact, as Chris says, I mean, she studied it in great detail. So we're going to convene a group that's kind of a microcosm of your community, and they're going to help us tailor the engagement process because they know your community and they know their networks within it. And what we'll be doing is working with them to generate the interview guide based on the results of the survey. So that's going to be our stepping off point. So we've intentionally designed it so that we don't have that disconnect.
So let me ask staff, when we go through any strategic planning, or is this a valuable step into formulating those, or I'm just trying to understand our process. And
Yes.
Does it add value?
Yes, I believe it does. When you look at our current strategic plan, and Bob, you were on the council when we formulated that, and we consider that a landmark document because it was really the first strategic plan that I think was universally supported by the council. And the council did a great job. They utilized the citizen survey and frankly, your own sense of your own vision for Arvada to come up with a great document with the 4 priority areas and the 30 or so strategic results. What it lacked, and you could argue this a little bit in terms of the citizen survey, but what it lacked was the strong voice of the customer or the strong voice of the citizen, which is something that we're learning as we go through the Baldrige process, where there's actually a set of criteria around the voice of the citizen or the voice of the customer. This has the opportunity to give us that voice of the customer, the voice of the citizen, starting with the citizen survey as the stepping off point, but digging deeper into that to finding out a little bit more about what our citizens desire, what they like about Arvada, what they want us to continue to really emphasize and be good stewards of, as well as what they might want us to change or improve on. This is something that I think over the last year, I believe, personally, I've started to feel more strongly about it because I think it's something that we lacked in the current strategic plan, and that if we built this process in and it aligns with our neighborhood engagement program, I think this is something that could be very valuable for staff as we start to work with the council on the next update to the strategic plan.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me now that you relate it to our specific situation with the strategies, and so for that I'm good with what was explained there. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Jones.
Thank you. So I'm still trying to catch up here on the thought. I mean, it feels to me like a really heavy lift because with multiple meetings or however that's ultimately structured, it feels like we're going to get lots of input from wider streets to roundabouts to more trails to bike lanes on every road to single hauler to, and I'm not pointing at you. I pointed at Dot. 64%. So it feels like there's so many data points. What's the process of narrowing that down so that when we get to our retreat, we don't have 82 pages of things that now we got to consider that.
Yeah, and that is what the process does. I mean, you start with so for instance, I mentioned the Adams 12 school district. So they had like 6,000 different people who gave them data. They gave them information, stories about the school district at its best. They gave them descriptions of hopes and dreams, and one way we got that honed in is we actually had people pick photos that represented their hopes and dreams and captions to go with them, and then they gave them their big ideas. So they had thousands of ideas, and that's where our core team came in, because we actually, in the course of 4 hours with them and 2 hours with a subgroup, we got through all of the data and honed it to where we could take it to the full core team. And in 4 hours, they went through all the data and identified 10 focus areas for the district. And we did an online survey with really good response, over 3,000 people. And we asked them, what are the most important focus areas? And they told us, and we ended up with 6. So we took those 6 to our big event. We have a big event planned here. And that's where we asked each person who attended to pick one focus area that they wanted to concentrate on. And they went through and took a kind of organized list of the ideas and said which are the most important ones to do, and are there any new ones we think are important to do. And they each group of like 40 people picked up to 6 actions that they thought were priority actions for those focus areas. So we basically, at the end of the day, had 36 actions, not 6,000. So I mean, that's kind of where our process expertise comes in. It's our job to do that for you, is to have your community feel that, yes, they got to put their thumbprint on saying what's important. They were really engaged. Not only, you won't just get words out of this, you'll get, it's the word Nancy's been using, attachment. You'll get people who feel more connected to their community. In Longmont, when we did this and they had the floods, it was the people who had been involved in that process who suddenly started calling and saying, what can we do? We want to help you. So you'll get that kind of connection as well.
So, and maybe this is more of a question for Mark, but it feels like, everything east of Ward Road is going to have maybe one set of ideas, and everything west of Ward Road may have, and they're all good ideas. And so how do we then incorporate that into our strategic plan? Do we have, are we geographically going to be looking at setting strategic council, goals and initiatives to be able to take in all of the ideas that may have differing views or opinions about what's important or what makes Arvada home to them?
And the answer is maybe. I think that's ultimately going to be something that will be up to the council as we develop the strategic plan. In all honesty, we are already doing that in many ways. I mean, as you all well know, we have 4 sectors for policing, and we police those sectors very differently. And there's very different issues and demographics, crime trends, traffic issues, and things along those lines, which we've empowered those commanders in those specific areas to take those issues on, obviously with all of your blessing. That's how we do these things. That's how we have the 4, what will soon be 4, community stations set up. And we do the same thing with parks. We take care of park needs slightly different in certain areas of the city based on neighborhood and community needs. So some of that is already going on. Sometimes there's different capital projects that we do in different areas of the city. So by getting the voice of the customer, I think that helps us to clarify and sharpen what it is that we would be recommending as part of that strategic plan. It would be good, valuable information for all of you to consider as you put the strategic plan together. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the City Council strategic plan. So this is information that would help to inform you, but it's certainly not the information that would bind you to doing a certain action. Ultimately, that will be up to you at the point that we develop the strategic plan and you approve it.
Okay, thank you. And with regards to different needs from community policing, trust me, I've gone on a ride in Charlie, and we didn't do anything. And then I went on a ride in Baker, and we were busy all night long. Thank you.
Ms. Miller?
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I appreciate the time you took to catch me up since I wasn't here in the first one. One thing I would like to say, because it is community engagement, is one of the reasons that I ran for council. It's incredibly important to me. But what is more importantly to me is that when we hear from the community, that we listen to the community. And I want to just stress the importance of being responsive to the end result, and that if we get an end result that we're not looking at or currently for our strategic plan, that we consider it because we listen to the voice. People want to see their thumbprint on the plan, and we're going to ask them to put their thumbprint on the plan. So I'm going to expect that we're going to put their thumbprint on the plan. We want to make sure that if we're asking the question, that we listen to the answer, whether we want to hear it or not.
Ms. Ford?
So I have a couple of comments to make. First of all, I would just like to say that to my fellow council members, several of the advantages that I see with this product that we're going to get is that this is qualitative research. When we've done the survey, that's quantitative research. It's it's a different form of research, because in this research, you're getting lots of detail. But we won't actually get that detail from the consultants. What they do, and what all researchers do when they have qualitative data, is as they said, they put it into main themes. So you're not getting overwhelmed, but you're getting those main themes. The other value that I see with this is that it would specifically, by using the neighborhood engagement, would be getting people who don't normally participate. And I think that's so valuable, because especially right now in what's going on with the city, and all over the Front Range, we are in this tremendous state of development right now. And a lot of it in Arvada is being affected by transportation. And if you go back to the comprehensive plan and you look at the key themes that council has looked at in the comprehensive plan, to me, I think this is very important for not only in gathering information, but it's also going to enable many residents to understand what's in the comprehensive plan that they may not know is there. Because if you think about it, how many residents have read the comprehensive plan? And it's a much more visual visual methodology. I had the pleasure of didn't read through the whole book, but definitely looked at some important key points that Chris made in her book. When you look at the fact that 83% of humans learn visually, that's how we learn through visual. Our ancestors who made those cave paintings prior to written language. I mean, visual is a very important aspect. And so in this process, what's so great is that not only as a final product, we could actually get, Barbara and Chris did this with the employees, where they actually took us through, I was there, thankfully it was a real nice experience. They actually took us through a process. I don't know how many people have actually seen the map that Chris drew as employees were talking about the city of Arvada. It was very interesting and very helpful to see that in a visual format. I think that a lot of what's in the comprehensive plan could actually be done visually, so people truly can understand what it is that we're creating, and especially the fact that, as was just mentioned in the arts and culture master plan proposal, that aesthetics is one of the key drivers in attachment to one's city. And if you think about it, the fact that we're changing our aesthetics in a very extreme way in many cases in Arvada right now, I think it would be very, very advantageous to truly understand what people are thinking about the changes that are taking place in our city. And I think, and I would agree with the consultants, that it's fine that if Western Arvada sees things differently, because that's who we are as a city. I mean, we can't change our city. Our city is going to evolve as the people come in and remain in our city. I just want to point out a couple of things that Chris mentions in her book. Images show connections, so it's very easy for people to be shown a picture and people react. They look at a picture, they consider what they're seeing. They can contemplate and make choices. Pictures help clarify complexities. They simplify key concepts and messages and inspire people to act. you know, one of the questions that I think is very important is, how do I want my city to look now? How do I want it to look in the future? How do I want to see Arvada change over time? Pictures also engage the imagination. They allow people to dream. What can Arvada be? It's a situation where you allow people to not think about cost and all the, you know, it's a freedom. It allows people to dream.
Nancy, can I interrupt you 1 second and ask them a quick question?
Sure.
You brought up something I don't want to lose
Sure,
my
go
thought
ahead.
here. So this plan that you're proposing to us, though, doesn't include the pictures, right? That was your previous one. To me, this sounds like a different plan and a different way of engagement, and as Mr. McGough was asking the question, more of a report of a statement or a kind of findings that you found in conducting the process. Is that correct?
Our assumption is that the visuals would be embedded in the plan, would be. So it doesn't, yep.
So it is.
So
the
we would
pic-
still,
it is
yes,
the- it is
it's
the
still
picture.
assumed
Okay.
in the budget.
Okay,
Yep.
fine.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Go ahead, Nancy. Sorry. Thank you for letting me interrupt you.
Pictures sometimes can avoid obstacles. I think that's very key, especially with the development that's going on in Arvada. This process is a catalyst for team engagement and commitment. It aligns people. It allows people to talk through things to the point where they can even agree on direction. And I think that's a very valuable piece to this that we don't see that often in Arvada, is allowing people to actually talk about certain issues and being able to do that through community leaders. For example, you would be a perfect leader, in a group with your love of engagement. How do people really want to see Arvada in the future? I think these are really important questions that will never come out in a quantitative survey, but can only come out in a process like this, where people actually get a chance to elaborate on what they're thinking.
So are you saying that the rest of us wouldn't be good leaders?
I'm not commenting on anybody.
Except for Dot.
I only say that because Dot is the only one who said she ran for community engagement. I think that's an important piece of information right there.
I have a couple questions for you. So I want to be, I guess, maybe a little more clear about the process and what you're going to do. So let me see if I can recite what I think you said, and then you can correct me on what you really said. So it sounds like to me you're going to start with a base of our existing strategic plan and the citizen survey that was recently compiled. And from that, you're going to attempt to engage a large number in the community through online or surveys or something like that, and try to develop some themes that then you'll bring forth at a very large community summit. Is that
I'll
what
rely
we're
on
looking
Barbara
at?
too, but just a clarification. So one of the consistent themes between the first proposal we presented and this proposal is that we have actually a community committee that we envision having city staff and some of the neighborhood engagement members on that committee to help focus the questions that get posed to the larger community. So building on the citizen survey or the community survey and the strategic plan is using that resource you already have in place. So number one, we're not asking questions that people have already been asked in subsequent or in other processes, and to make sure that the questions that we're asking come right from those neighborhood engagement leaders themselves, that they know, because they're boots on the ground, that they know are important to the people in their community. Do you want to say about the next part?
Yeah.
Synthesizer.
Off? Oh, there we go. So part of the value of that group that I said was the microcosm of the community is that they will help tailor our plan so that we are reaching as many people as possible in the ways that are convenient and attractive to them. And they will also be our ambassadors going out into the community. They're then going to, as Chris said, based upon the survey and the strategic plan, they're going to help us develop an interview guide that's about Arvada's future and their ideas to make it a reality. That guide will then go out into the community in many different ways. So again, it's this notion of making community engagement convenient for people.
When you say interview guide, are you talking about, is that like a questionnaire? Is that what you're talking about?
It's like a questionnaire, but it has narrative data. So the first question is going to be probably be something like this. Tell me about a time here in the city of Arvada when you really felt proud of your city, and what was happening, who was involved, what was it about Arvada that was so special for you, and what was that connection like for you? So people begin with these strength-based stories about the place at its best. Now that may sound a little woo-woo, but the truth is, if you have people, and we've had it in almost all our projects, if you have people who are from, what'd you say, the west side, and they disagree on priorities, and maybe they're at loggerheads, when they begin with that sense of pride in their community, it creates a different connection. They think, I didn't have anything in common with you, and we mix people up. We make sure that people are interviewing the folks they wouldn't normally talk to, so we get them out of their fiefdoms.
Hang on one second. Let me ask you a quick question about that. So these are the neighborhoods connected, neighborhood strong leaders, but are you going to have them interview people from different neighborhoods or something like that?
We're going to have them, yep, they'll go out and interview different people.
And is this a door-to-door, hi,
No,
Mrs.
well,
Jones, what
they're
are you
gonna
doing
help
tonight?
us-
Can I have you fill this out, or I'm just trying to figure out kind of the mechanical process more so than the
It's one of these processes that when you go through it, you get it, but to explain it is challenging. But that committee is going to help us figure out what's the best way for that to happen. But let me give you an example. In the city of Longmont, we had them do a big stakeholder mapping where they identified all the segments of their community. You know, they had business and civic and faith and, you know, government and all these different segments. And then they identified kind of the movers and shakers in those communities. They picked names. So if I came from a business perspective, I might pick the environmental name. And they went and did a couple interviews with those people. They then did a second round of interviews where the instruction was, go interview somebody that you think probably never participates in a city process. So one woman interviewed the grocery store clerk that she'd been talking to just politely for 5 years. Another person did their neighbor. One person did his auto mechanic. So they do the same interviews. That's how we bring these new voices in. We also convene conversations like out in the neighborhoods where we invite organizations to send several people, and we invite the public to come, and then we mix people up in tables doing interviews there, and then saying, what did the interviews tell us? What do they mean? What are the major themes for our vision? What are the major ideas that, you know, you're excited about? We have for the Museum of Nature and Science, we created a mini conversation kit like that where people could go administer these meetings on their own, kind of a meeting in a box idea. And so a pastor of a church did a mini conversation with one group that he meets with, and then with a Spanish-speaking group. So we're very creative in how we engage people.
Let me ask you a question. Tell me roughly what's your goal for how many of these you want to do. So I'm calling it a survey. You could call it a questionnaire. I think you're calling it an interview. Whatever it is. Do you have a goal on a number? Is it in the thousands? Is it in the hundreds? Is it in the tens? What does that look like as far as time and volume?
Yeah. Well, so it's going to be a mixture of in-person interviews that take place in meetings, and online interviews. So given that, it is in the thousands. If it was all in person, thousands would be a lot.
Okay. So you expect you'll have in the thousands as far as responses.
Okay. So I mean, like, I think probably the Adams 12 School District is an excellent example. We did connect with 3,000 people in person and 3,500 online.
Right. Okay. So I'm glad you mentioned the Adams 12 thing. So the question I have is, you know, when I look at it from two perspectives or two thrusts here. One is, you know, in the city of Arvada, the issues can be, and I think Mr. Jones talked about it, the issues can be everything from these giant conceptual issues like I don't even know what, to these tiny little, my neighborhood or my part of it or my this or my that, and everything in between. And I don't know how many, potential issues you might have, but I would guess that's got to be in the thousands too. But when you were doing Adams 12 School District, that's as a segment of government and their mission and what they do and how they do it. Of course, that's a much smaller, more
Sure.
focused thing. And I think within these examples you gave us, like the Eagle P3, they were talking about two things,
Yeah.
permit practices and the escalation practice,
Right.
things like that. They were very small and focused. Does what you're proposing work as well when we've got both broad and specific and giant numbers of both, as it does when you've got a specific thing like an escalation process? How do we make that the best?
Yeah, it does. In fact, when we were here before, we spoke a lot about the City of Longmont citywide strategic plan. So that's similar to what you're talking about. I call them the dandelion people who are really focused on what they want. They want that dandelion removed. And then other people who are much more conceptual about the vision of the city. And, in that process, I think Longmont at the time was about maybe 75,000 people. We went through a very similar process, and we did end up with, I think it was 5 strategic directions that came out of the plan, and a whole bunch of actions that supported those.
Okay. Let me ask you one other question, and then within this kind of process you described, you talk about engaging the community leaders and trying to mix people up and making their job to go out and find other people who don't ever participate, whether it's the grocery clerk or the auto mechanic or whatever. But it sounds like it could easily end up being weighted by kind of either the usual suspects or the activist groups that whether it's, I think about the Chamber of Commerce. That's a group of people that participate in everything. How do you keep their voices from just being out, have an extra weight, regardless of whether it's the Chamber of Commerce or just the folks who are normally engaged or the people who serve on our boards and commissions, that intensity of engagement? How do you unweight that? How can you?
So you start with the committee that you have and make sure it's got different perspectives on it. So you have people who maybe are from segments of the population who aren't as engaged because they know how to engage those people. Like, so maybe you have some young people and some young parents, things like that. So that they're advising us on how best to reach out in this community, because they know that better than we do. They know it from the perspective of the citizen participating, and they know what they are aware of and what they're not, and what makes them aware and what makes them engage. And then you design mechanisms to go out to reach the people you wouldn't normally reach. And sometimes what we do is we capitalize on an event that's already taken place. So it's, you heard from the arts and culture. They went to different fairs. So in Longmont, we went to a festival, and we just used one of our questions, and we just had people going around and asking that one question so we could reach those people. So, we'll really tailor it for what needs to happen. There's, in any community engagement, it's all about who decides to participate. Our job is to make sure that we do our due diligence in trying to give them a convenient, engaging way to influence decision making. But it's the old, you can lead a horse to water. So you do get more of those people. There's a group called the International Association for Public Participation, and until last month, yay, I was their president here, and I helped develop their training. And if you want, techniques that are really good for getting more of that representative voice are surveys, statistical surveys, telephone town halls. There's things like that we could look at if that's important, to trying to make sure we're really reaching a whole lot of people who might not otherwise participate. But that is always a challenge in community engagement.
Okay.
Until something goes wrong, and then everybody, you know it.
Thank you. Last question. So sounds like the idea here is to go out and do these surveys, come up with lots of information, themes, and some specific, some broad, and then culminating in a large summit. So you're talking about trying to have a very large community meeting. How big of a community meeting are you talking again? Are you trying to draw and host thousands at something like this, or hundreds, or tens, or what have you done in the past, or what does that look like when you've done
In
that
the past, in community settings, the summits tend to be anywhere from like 150 to 250,
Okay.
because you're not going to get thousands of people to come out to plan the city for a day. But if they've been involved earlier, then you do the feedback loop so they see how the people who did show up, what happened with what they see where their thumbprint is.
Right.
To
Okay.
use Dot's term.
Okay, and so then the deliverable then from all that process culminating with this summit is then kind of a narrative with pictures. Is that kind of what you're saying, that would lay out some number of either themes or specific things that then we could consider going forward as we contemplate our next strategic plan? Is that kind of what the plan is?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So a vision statement, key theme areas, and as much data underneath those theme areas as you might want.
Mm-hmm. But more in a picture format than really a narrative, or kind of both, or?
You'll get both.
Both, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all my questions. Anybody else have any questions or want to pass some direction on to Mr. Devon here? Mr. McGough?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the presentation, and thank you, Mr. Devon, for your comments. As indicated with my first question about the nature of the product, I was a little bit confused and therefore concerned about what we might receive if we entered into this program and funded the project. Really swayed by Mr. Devon's comments about the value and the need for stakeholder input to the plans. I like the example you gave of the kind of question that might start out the process. I can envision that being very helpful. Ask people about what it is that makes them proud of their city, or of times or events or whatever where they felt connected, and get them to speak in that way, because often we're just talking about information input. Here we're talking about impressions and values input. So I think I would propose that we do proceed with the visioning project as described this evening.
Mr. Jones.
So I think a year ago, I might have said that I wasn't, and I don't know exactly what my words were, but that's right.
They've already forgotten. Right?
That's right. And it wasn't that I was opposed to the idea or the thought around it. It felt, maybe it felt too big. And this still feels big, but it feels more attainable. I think, again, echoing what Mr. McGough said, with Mr. Devon's comments around the input and the importance of that input as we go into this next cycle of strategic planning. So I think for those reasons, I would be supportive of it. I hope that that you're as good as you have been for other communities for us, because it feels like there's a lot of information out there, and I think that the citizenry of Arvada is passionate about Arvada, and there are going to be many viewpoints, as been discussed a lot tonight, and so I'm hoping that you can help synthesize that in a format that is meaningful and actionable for us, ultimately to make our job easier as we take that input in and allow the citizens to put their thumbprint on it. So, yeah, I would be in favor of moving forward.
Okay. Mr. Pfeiffer?
So I'll echo my peers' comments, but I'll add my nerdy and techie sense translated your presentation to big data, turning it into digestible dashboards so we can make thoughtful decisions. That's how the way I looked at it in my nerdy side, but it took me a while to get there. I agree. I think it was boiling the ocean. It was way too big last year. We didn't feel that there would be something tangible coming, or at least I didn't feel that something tangible would come out of it. I think if you let things bake for a little while and let us kind of digest the concept and the thoughts, we'll get there. Because I think Mr. Devon made a good point. He wasn't too sure at the beginning, but after he's thought about it and talked with the staff and see the value add, it's a good idea. So I know it's taken us a year to get there, but we're here, and I support also this effort.
Okay. Anybody else want to make a comment? You don't have to, Nancy. You can, or
It's not required. It's like a vote.
don't make me. Don't let me force you.
Well, does the fact that I'm a marketing researcher and my tagline for my business says knowledge for informed decision making say anything about where I might go with this?
No.
Okay.
Of course, I'm absolutely thrilled with the idea of this project, and I know you two will do a great job, and I thank you for your presentation again.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Miller, are you good?
I'm good.
Okay. I just want to make a quick comment and just to express what my reservations would be, and that is if we're going to engage in something like this, I'd like to see it be productive and not destructive. And I think we want to be, I'm hoping that you can be careful and sensitive in how you go about this. I would feel so much more comfortable if we were doing this exercise about our infrastructure only, that it had just that guard, those guardrails around it, because it's more of a defined thing. I think this process to me seems like it has the ability to drift into all kinds of places that may or may not really be something we can do or be on our radar, and I'm hopeful that you guys can guide the process to keep it focused enough to where it's useful to us. And so, that would be kind of my concern. My other concern then would be to if you can make sure your process is one that truly unweights some of the weightedness out there by the way these public processes always go. I can hold a community meeting and there's 6 or 7 people who will always come, and so their input is always in everything. Now there's other people who might come once in 4 years. The weight of their input is just much less, and I think we can easily have these types of processes where kind of the usual suspects or the groups or whatever have kind of outsized influence, and I'm hopeful that we can try to ensure that's at least minimized as much as possible, and that this truly isn't a process where a conclusion is reached and now this is how we lead you to the conclusion that we've already reached. Because I think I'll mention our citizen survey. I think our citizen survey did that on a couple questions, kind of had an outcome in mind and was kind of leading people to that outcome. And to me, if you want to do that on every subject, it's probably fine, but then all of a sudden what subjects you pick become all important. So those are just my fears. I just want you to know as you go forward to try to keep those things in mind, as well as all the other questions and comments that you got here tonight, and try to do the best job you possibly can for us. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, everybody okay? You want a quick stretch? All right, we're going to take one more little quick stretch in place, just a minute or so, and then we'll get started on our last one. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you'll take your seats, let's start up our third workshop for tonight. Tonight we have the City of Arvada City Council Strategic Plan 2014 to 2019 fourth update. Mr. Devon.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Pro Tem, members of the council, what is before you tonight is the update, the fourth update to the strategic plan. I can quickly summarize the major changes to the strategic plan based on the retreat back on January the 19th, 2018. You directed us to create a new strategic result focus on transportation and mobility. The proposed strategic result on that is that by the end of 2018, create a mobility index to include a combination of subjective citizen opinions and objective internal condition ratings in 4 strategic areas: modal availability, system maintenance, system operations, and education promotion. And if you need some more explanation of that, Mr. Manwaring or myself can provide that for you. So if you do, let me know. Second was a creation of a new strategic result focused on community-based attainable housing. And with that one, we're proposing that by the end of 2018, create a strategic partnership between the City of Arvada, State of Colorado, Jefferson County, and City of Wheat Ridge to determine the potential of utilizing the Ridge Home site for community-based attainable housing. Third, updated strategic result focused on the Jefferson Parkway Public Highway Authority. And for that, we have a strategic result of, it's actually an updated one, which is by 2019, the project development and procurement process for the Jefferson Parkway Public Highway Authority will be completed. Fourth, we deleted a strategic result around alternative travel modes. And then last, we rewrote the strategic results focused on sidewalks and trail gaps. In that case, we actually worked on, we deleted the one on 20% of all sidewalk gaps selected from the Transportation Committee inventory and approved by City Council will be built according to the then current code requirements. And then we also deleted the strategic result around identified trail gaps and connection points recognized in the city parks, trails, and open space master plan and bicycle master plan as identified by the Park Advisory Committee. We do also have a strategic result that was completed in 2017. This was not discussed at the retreat, but it had to do with the municipal court's strategic result on 75% of middle and senior high school age juvenile cases will meet completion of sentencing requirements aimed at positively changing decision-making and behavior within 120 days. The court is actually introducing a new proposed strategic result, which is that by 2019, 100% of juveniles charged with criminal offenses will receive measurable, risk-based pre-sentence assessment. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, Mr. Pfeiffer?
Yeah, you said deleted on some of those, but weren't some of those really completed? Like the one around the sidewalk gaps. I hate using the word deleted. If we just completed it, we should show the success.
Okay, Kelly just reminded me that we did not delete it, but we included it within the mobility strategic result.
Okay.
So it's part of the multimodal.
Because, it's exciting when you see things completed. So I always want to keep a record of the completed ones because that shows progress.
Oh, yes, we keep a
I don't want us
record
to
of
delete
those.
them because we completed them.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, Mr. McGough?
Yes, I was just wondering, we've got 2 of the new strategic results identified as to be accomplished in 2018. Are we on track for those by the end of the year? We're doing good?
In terms of the mobility index, Mr. McGough, we are working with a team of people from parks, planning, and traffic and engineering, and looking at a variety of different mobility issues that have come up whether it's transit-related, or it's multimodal-related, or it's simply the traffic or roads. And we're developing a plan that integrates all those disciplines to try to come up with a much bigger picture, a more global picture of what mobility really means in Arvada. And my conversations with Mr. Pfeiffer are probably looking at some kind of smart technology that would integrate all those pieces together. And we'll carry on through the year to come up with a plan.
So it means by the end of the year, we'll have something definite to look at.
We'll be very mobile.
Okay. Okay, that's important. And what about the attainable housing strategic results?
On that one,
are we doing well on that one?
Well, on that one, we have a conceptual agreement that's been forged by staff. The next step, and I might add, the most important step, is to carry that conceptual agreement into some form of either an MOU or IGA that has the blessings of the elected officials for Arvada, Wheat Ridge, and Jefferson County. That's the next step on that one, and I believe we can complete that by the end of 2018.
Okay, I know you have one of the next steps is coming up very soon to present that to the other managers. Is that right?
Actually, what we want to do is provide an update at the next quarterly Commissioners and Municipalities meeting, and then based on the reaction from, in particular, the City Council, Arvada City Council, Wheat Ridge City Council, and the Board of County Commissioners, at that point, we would look to convene a joint meeting at some point and present a document to you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, any other questions on the?
Oh, I apologize. I highlighted this in my report, but unfortunately I didn't move the screen up far enough to see this. One of the other things that we have proposed, that is being proposed as part of this, is to break out public safety and make public safety its own priority area. It's been embedded in vibrant community and neighborhoods. However, we think that after a lot of reflection and a lot of discussion amongst all of us, that public safety is important enough to break out as its own priority area. Also, I think with our emphasis on neighborhood engagement, we're seeing that also as something that can stand on its own as well. So your strategic plan that you'll look at on May the 7th will have 5 priority areas, with the 5th one being public safety.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from the council on this topic? Comments? Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Devon. Thanks for that update. That brings us to our last item, which is just staff updates. Do we have anything for us tonight?
No,
okay.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
Anything from the city attorney's office? Okay. Thank you. With that, we're adjourned.